For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe. One might think that events that happened thousands of years ago generally would be considered relatively trivial to most people, of interest to the history buff, but surely having little bearing on political goings-on in today's world. I mean, we could understand how more recent history would have something to do with current hot-button issues. But the further back in time we go, surely the less relevant these matters would be in modern politics, right? Well, yeah, that actually is correct. They have little relevance, and by and large, people today don't care one way or the other whether this happened or that happened so long ago. It's old news. But there are some people who think ancient history topics are relevant. And when those topics are discussed, they might get just as riled up about it as if they were talking about politics. Well, in their minds, they are talking about politics. It might be as simple as preferring a certain theory over others for political reasons. But they might even go so far as to use ancient history to achieve political aims. Now, I'm sure you realize how ancient history and religion today might intersect in some way. But today, we're going to talk about how ancient history and current politics intersect. Having an ancient history YouTube channel has exposed me to a lot of this, and some people get very, very angry if you suggest that history did not play out in a certain way. So, based on my experiences, I want to share with you how it is that modern political sensibilities would be at all concerned about things that happened so long ago. Hi, I'm David Miano. I'm a scholar of ancient history and a teacher by trade, and on this channel, I do my best to give you the straight facts on what we know about the ancient past, without appealing to fanciful tales, science fiction, conspiracies, or ideology. This time around, I'm going to talk about reactions to history, and not so much on the history itself. What modern political concerns make people interested in ancient history? For some, the political interest precedes the historical interest. Let me say here at the outset that in this video, I will not be myself promoting any particular political point of view. If that's what you wanted, you'll be disappointed. But I will tell you this. My personal view is that although what happened in the ancient past can inform us today, that is, we can certainly learn lessons from the past, we shouldn't use it as a tool to promote political agendas or to create a version of history intentionally to align with our political views. Even the mere study of a historical topic with a strong bias is not a recipe for success. This is why I don't go into a research topic trying to prove something. I deliberately withhold my valued judgments until after I gather the evidence and analyze it according to the historical method. This will help me from being led astray by my wishes and desires. Then I draw a conclusion. It's a protection. Mind you, this is not to say that I, or historians in general, have no biases. Oh, we absolutely do. But we do our best to let the evidence speak for itself. And as a check on our internal biases, we submit our ideas to peer review to allow other people, many of whom have opposing biases, to scrutinize them. The controversy then allows us to form a synthesis. But we're going to talk about people who don't do that. People on both ends of the political spectrum, left and right, who try to use ancient history to achieve political aims. Now, sometimes they get ancient history right, and a lot of times they get it wrong, but in this regard it doesn't matter. In all cases, it is a misuse of ancient history, because, as I'll go on to explain, the foundational assumptions are flawed. I won't be taking any sides here because when it comes to reconstructing the past, the only two sides are the side that allows the evidence to speak for itself and the side that cherry-picks the evidence to suit an agenda. And they do not correspond to any one set of political positions. Usually these people are not historians themselves because historians are trained not to do this, but this isn't always the case. I will be expressing some strong opinions which may rub some people the wrong way, so beware. So what are the ways in which ancient history is used to serve political goals? Today we will focus on 4 of them. 1. To establish a race or ethnicity as superior to others. 2. To promote ethnic nationalism. 3. To support a claim to land. And 4. To win the culture war. Let's take a look at each of these in detail. There is some overlap between them. How do many people from all over the world use ancient history to establish a race or ethnicity, usually their own, as superior to others? One way would be to convince people of the age of their civilization or culture. And the idea is that if it's older than all the other civilizations, then it is the best civilization. The implication is that everyone else copied them. This point of view, interestingly, existed also in ancient times. The various cultures were always trying to outdo the others by saying that they were here first. As you may know, I released a video recently about where the Sumerians might have come from. Their origins are not known for sure. And the Sumerians have the reputation for being the world's oldest known urban society. Well, the video received many comments from people asserting quite positively that the Sumerians were actually their people. Kurds, Turks, Indians, Dravidians, Armenians, the African race, Caucasians. Now, yeah, these are just random commenters, but these comments reflect actual positions that have been taken, books that have been written, trying to link the Sumerians to one or another modern-day cultures. Cultural pride is a motivating factor, but also there are more serious political implications. You've probably noticed that many of the peoples mentioned are in the middle of disputes right now concerning land rights, oppression, and other historical gripes with other groups. Establishing the antiquity of their people is one of several ways to give them a leg up in these disputes. I'll talk about that more in a few minutes, but approaching the Sumerian origin issue with such ideologies in tow, well, this is not going to help someone get a clear and accurate picture of history, right? Another example is when you see people pointing to the great sculpted heads of the Olmecs from Mesoamerica and saying that their appearance is evidence that they came from Africa. Therefore, the Olmec culture was an African transplant rather than an indigenous creation. Or when others point to statues from Asia or Africa that have blue eyes and say that this indicates that civilizations here were established by light-skinned people and not black or brown people. These arguments do not come from a dispassionate consideration of all the evidence, because all the evidence is not considered. They are politically motivated. The thinking behind this, and this is something that comes up in pseudo-archaeology and pseudo-history all the time, is that civilizations have family trees, just like people do, and that the earlier cultures gave rise to the later cultures. If you can establish priority of significant achievements, whether they be certain technologies or great cultural innovations, and you assume that every great idea can have occurred only once in human history and then was spread from that one source to all others, you have shown, it is believed, your superiority. This assumption, by the way, is called hyperdiffusionism, and I talk about it more in detail in my video, When Fake Archaeology Uses Fake Science. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the prevailing method to ascertain where people migrated in history and prehistory was to track the movement of cultures. This approach assumed that ethnic groups were straightforward categories, distinctly delineated with a material record uniquely characteristic to them. So the movement of these material attributes was viewed as a proxy for the movement of people. But the more we studied this, the more complex we came to realize it was. Archaeological cultures did not always coincide neatly with ethnicities or language groups. In the late 20th century, focus shifted towards small-scale identities and their developments and away from externally ascribed ethnic identifiers, largely rejecting migration as an explanatory device for the spread of archaeological culture. However, advancements in sequencing ancient DNA, more recently, has enabled the creation of genomic population maps for various periods in human history, and uncovering previously inaccessible information about past populations. And we're running into the same problems. Geneticists have sometimes operated under assumptions of past populations as static, bounded units, copying the conceptual approaches from early 20th century archaeology. After all, it would make things a lot simpler if we could just assume that genetic haplogroups neatly coincided with cultures or language groups. Genetic samples, often derived from teeth of specific individuals in cemeteries, are equated with entire archaeological cultures, which in turn are assumed to represent ethnic groups. This overlooks the social, economic, and environmental contexts of burials and the various ways in which social factors may influence population structure. Approaching this subject under the assumption that social or cultural groups must be genetically homogeneous not only obscures any genetic heterogeneity that may be present, but it is inherently essentialist and burdened with problematic ideological implications that other people can run with. The public is fascinated with narratives of origins and ancestry, and now scientific methodologies seemingly offer certainty and clarity in the intricate interplay of ancient people and cultures. Over recent years, archaeologists and geneticists have observed the misinterpretation of ancient DNA discoveries, often due to oversimplification or the exploitation of findings to support divisive arguments about race and ethnicity. One example is a study that revealed that Britain's earliest farmers had ancestry originating from the Aegean region and underwent a gradual migration across Western Europe over a span of 2,000 years. However, this nuanced finding was sensationalized by tabloids, distorting it into headlines like, "Turks built Stonehenge." Notions of a biological basis for race have been embraced by race realists who leverage recent genomic research on population histories to legitimize pre-existing ideas about race. Posters on the white supremacist forum Stormfront frequently have cited genetic research to support their arguments about racial superiority. They particularly focus on studies that suggest that groups from the Yamnaya culture migrated into Western Europe from the Eurasian steppe, replacing local populations and introducing Indo-European languages. This narrative serves as an origin myth for the Aryan race in their eyes. These ideas become important in today's politics because they align with broader social concerns surrounding migration today, exacerbated by events such as the European refugee crisis and global labor migrations. The public today eats up news stories framed in ethnic terms. To be clear here, although race and ethnicity do hold significance as social constructs, geneticists have debunked the idea that they represent biologically meaningful categories. Despite this scientific understanding, the misconception that DNA can provide definitive insights into our cultural or ethnic identity persists. Identitarianism, which is a philosophy of the far right, can be seen in many of these arguments. But of course, we also have identity politics on the left. I'm sure you've heard of the term identity politics before. It's been bandied about. It refers to a number of political theories and activities rooted in the shared experiences of injustice among members of specific minority groups, in contrast to arguments attempting to demonstrate the superiority of a social group. Identity politics insists that certain social groups be recognized as historically oppressed. They aren't calling for inclusion into society based on shared human attributes, nor for respect despite differences. Rather, it's a call for respect based on one's unique identity. Because this is not a claim of superiority, it doesn't fall into the current category of discussion. And in identity politics discourse on the left, the history that they put forward to support their claims is confined largely to more recent history, things that have happened usually within the last 500 years. This is different from people on the right, who often like to go way back in time. Since we're focusing on ancient history, we will move on, but I will be talking about the political left again in matters coming up. Personally, I don't believe that we inherit the glory or the guilt of our ancient ancestors. I do understand how we can be proud of our family members. We can rightly be proud of what our grandparents accomplished, even what our relatively recent ancestors did. But to claim that because my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents did something glorious, I also am glorious, or that because they did something reprehensible, I also am reprehensible, is nonsense. I think each person's value should be judged on their own merits, independent of their parents or forebears. And this principle applies not just to individuals, but also to larger groups. So for similar reasons, can we reasonably suppose that any extant culture in the world today inherits the glory or the guilt of an ancient version of itself? No offense, but this whole idea of building ourselves up because of what our ancient ancestors did is, in my opinion, just laziness. What have you done recently? What have you personally done? Ethnic nationalism, also known as ethno-nationalism, desires a nation and nationality based on ethnicity. It emphasizes an ethnocentric approach to various political issues, leading to policies that prioritize the interests of the dominant ethnic group over others. You can see some overlap with what we were just talking about. Now, how does ancient history come into play here? Well, one form of ethno-nationalism posits that nations or ethnic identities are inherently fixed, natural, and ancient. This belief is termed primordialism. Primordialism, proponents of it argue that individuals possess a single innate ethnic identity that has its roots back in antiquity and is independent of more recent historical events. For the record, scholars of ethnicity widely reject this view, noting that ethnic identities are fluid, changeable, and socially constructed. They do acknowledge the existence of distinct group characteristics such as culture, traditions, and language, but they reject the notion that these characteristics are inherent and unchanging. And this makes sense because people enter and exit societies all the time, and throughout history they have shared culture and shared DNA. So ethnic identities clearly have been shaped by social processes and interactions, with individuals often holding multiple ethnic identities. But not so for the ethno-nationalist. They like to keep it simple. For example, a 2017 study published in Nature, highlighting genetic similarities between modern Greeks and ancient inhabitants of Mycenaean and Minoan settlements, was seized upon by some Greek ethno-nationalists who declared it as proof of a 4,000-year racial continuity for Greeks. Another example of primordialism that I encounter often comes from people associated with or adjacent to the Hindutva movement in India. The concept of Hindutva has been in use since the 1920s, notably introduced by V.D. Savarkar. Savarkar defined Hindutva as a combination of religious and cultural attributes that define Hindu identity. He described a Hindu as someone who considers the Indian subcontinent, from the Indus River to the seas, as both their fatherland and holy land. He believed also that Hindus shared a common ancestry within the Hindu or Aryan social group, adhering to a Sanskrit-based culture. According to him, being Hindu encompassed territorial, political, nationalistic, and ancestral dimensions. In Savarkar's perspective, to be truly Indian meant to be Hindu, and all non-Christians and non-Muslims in India, including Buddhist, Jains, and tribal populations, were automatically categorized as Hindus. However, Muslims and Christians were not. They could only be considered part of the group if they could trace their racial, ethnic, and cultural origins back to Hinduism. Savarkar's idea of Hindutva aimed to unite new nationalists under a continuous Indian identity with the goal of restoring a perceived golden age symbolized by Ram Raj, the Hindu god king Rama. Hindutva is thriving in India today. However, there have been instances where proponents of Hindutva have used pseudo-archaeology and myth history to advance their political agendas. I should add that Hindutva often presents itself as an anti-colonial movement. Normally we think of anti-colonialism as left-wing, but Hindutva is right-wing, so both sides use it. Anti-colonialism encompasses both a historical struggle for national independence and a conceptual framework for imagining a post-colonial world, and decolonization involves an undoing the colonialism, not only politically but also culturally. Ironically, Hindutva's acceptance of the ideas of Hinduism and nationhood, as defined by the West, the whole philosophy of nationalism is Western and very much an imperial product, isn't very anti-colonial. But what about ancient history? Well, the discipline of Indology has deep roots in the colonial era, and in fact the colonial era did produce primordialist theories of its own. One such theory was the Aryan invasion theory, which suggested that the civilization of South Asia was shaped by conflicts between different racial groups. According to this theory, the Aryans, who were light-skinned, Sanskrit-speaking, and pastoralists, invaded South Asia from the west, and upon their arrival they encountered the indigenous population, known as the Dasyus in Vedic texts, who were described as dark-skinned and often depicted as savage. These indigenous people are commonly identified as the Dravidians. The superior light-skinned people defeated the inferior dark-skinned people, and the encounter between the Aryans and the indigenous population played a significant role in the formation of the caste system. Some Aryans sought to maintain their purity by avoiding intermarriage with the indigenous population, while others intermarried but required a system of categorization to differentiate themselves. These ideas clearly exhibit similar characteristics to the white supremacist ideas we were just talking about earlier, which have the effect of establishing the antiquity and superiority of one's own culture. So there were two chief reactions against the Aryan invasion theory. The scholarly reaction was to collect more evidence, reassess the evidence, and arrive at a conclusion that is informed by the preponderance of the evidence from a neutral standpoint. So today we have the theory of Indo-Aryan migration. The migration part was kept because historical linguistics points in that direction. The idea is that Indo-Aryan people, a linguistic group, not a race, entered South Asia. They were part of the broader Indo-European language family. It's believed that modern South Asian culture is largely a result of cultural interactions between these Indo-Aryan migrants and the native peoples of the region. Unlike the Aryan invasion theory, this theory does not emphasize racial aspects such as skin color or on conquest, which there's very little evidence for, but instead on the spread of Vedic religion and the mixing of cultures. The other reaction against the Aryan invasion theory was to go entirely in the opposite direction, to suppose that India's culture was formed very much as it is now, far back in the recesses of time, and to reject the idea that India's Hindu-ness was ever diluted by any outsiders in the ancient period. This only happened later, when Christians and Muslims came. To be clear here, some scholars, particularly in India, have challenged the consensus viewpoint about Indo-Aryan migration and argue that no compelling evidence has been presented to support the notion of external origins for the Indo-Aryans. I think this challenge from a scholarly perspective is a good thing. But there is a more extreme form of indigenous thought, which generally comes from ideologues and non-specialists, called the out-of-India theory. This theory asserts that the Indo-Aryan Vedic culture is not only indigenous to South Asia, but also that the origins of the entire Indo-European language family can be traced back to South Asia. According to this view, the Indo-Europeans expanded outward from India, influencing what is now considered the Indo-European linguistic and cultural area. In other words, it is the polar opposite of the Aryan invasion theory. It's basically the same thing, going the other way. And the reason for supposing it is no less ideological than the original. This is a case where poor archaeology, poor linguistics, and poor science are employed to push the agenda. In the realm of pseudo-archaeology, proponents often exhibit strong resilience and energy, actively seeking to sow confusion. By captivating the media and influencing political agendas, they have sometimes succeeded in steering discussions to serve their own purposes. Another way that ancient history has been politicized is by using it as a way to claim land. This is related to nationalism. Historically, territorial sovereignty has been viewed as essential for nationhood and a defining aspect of state power. So, a common argument made is, I was here first, and that's a history issue, right? The concept of historical ownership, which is based on priority or duration, helps streamline which historical precedents should influence a territorial claim, enhancing the perception of legitimacy and boundaries. This idea, rooted in Western property rights, often brings grievances against those who took territory from its rightful owner, which can galvanize domestic support and earn international recognition. Therefore, historical ownership is an appealing justification for territorial claims. A territorial dispute involving historical ownership indicates that the nation lost control of the area at some point, and its efforts to reclaim it suggest the territory was unjustly taken. These elements can provoke strong emotional responses, sometimes leading individuals to view the territory as indivisible and adopt an uncompromising stance on its recovery. Now, usually, more recent history has been employed for the purpose of claiming land, but sometimes ancient history is used as a tool. A notable example of this is with regard to the State of Israel. To be clear, I'm not saying that historical ownership is the only argument used to support a claim to this territory, but it is a significant one, and I'm pointing it out because it uses ancient history. This past month, in an interview on CNBC, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said,
"We're here in this country. We're sitting in this city which King David declared as our capital 3,000 years ago.
We're sitting in this city," speaking of Jerusalem, "which King David declared as our capital 3,000 years ago." And this appeal to ancient history is fairly common among those looking to argue that Israel should have this land. We had this land thousands of years ago, so we have the right to have it now. Interestingly, there are Palestinians also who use this kind of argument in the opposite direction. In a speech in Berlin in 2017, Mahmoud Abbas, head of the Palestinian Authority, said, "Our people is an offshoot of the Canaanite people, who lived 3,500 years ago. Our country, which has already existed for thousands of years, included the first agricultural community in human history in Jericho, as well as the most ancient city, Jerusalem, the city of peace." The following statement can be found in a 1978 Palestinian encyclopedia. "The Palestinians are the descendants of the Jebusites, who are of Arab origin." The book also describes Jerusalem as an Arab city because its first builders were the Canaanite Jebusites, whose descendants are the Palestinians. You see, in the Bible, the city of Jerusalem was said to have been inhabited by Jebusites until it was conquered by King David. Ancient history here is being used to claim we had the city first. This assertion can be traced back until about the beginning of the current conflict, and it has been repeated by prominent Palestinian leaders, including Yasser Arafat. Abbas made this statement to the UN Security Council in 2018.
Excellencies, we are the descendants of the Canaanites that lived in the land of Palestine 5,000 years ago and continuously remained there to this day.
In response to this latter statement, journalist Victor Sharp, writing for the Israel National News, shared the common opposing view. The present-day so-called Palestinians are an Arab people sharing an overwhelmingly Muslim Arab culture, ethnicity, and language identical to their fellow Arabs in the Middle East and North Africa, with few, if any, distinctions. They are primarily the descendants of those itinerant Arabs who illegally flooded British Mandatory Palestine from Arab territories as far away as Sudan, Egypt, Syria, and what was Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. Both sides are playing free and loose with history. But the main point here is that people are using their ancestors' history from thousands of years ago to dictate modern nationhood or identity and a claim to land. And this is just my opinion, but I have a hard time understanding how a minute amount of DNA that someone has from their 100th great-grandparents somehow has a bearing on what land they should or should not hold today. If you do want to know what the real history is, let me know and I will make a video about it. Suffice it to say for now, the Palestinians have genetic roots with both ancient Canaanites and Arab invaders. Not that it matters now. You'll hear some people saying, there never was a nation called Palestine. Others will say, Palestine existed in ancient times. These actually are not contradictory statements, but again, they are being used as an argument for who belongs there. Because of the similarity of the words Palestinian and Philistine, a lesser-used argument is sometimes seen, which is that Palestinians are descendants of another ancient people, the Philistines. Philistines are not technically Canaanites. In 2019, a study published in Science Advances garnered media attention, including coverage in Smithsonian Magazine. The study examined DNA from 10 individuals buried in Ashkelon, a city in Gaza, dating back to the Bronze Age and Iron Age. The analysis revealed new genetic signatures in 4 of the individuals associated with the arrival of the Philistines over 3,000 years ago. These genetic traits resembled those of ancient populations from Greece, Italy, and Spain, leading the authors to suggest that the Philistines may have migrated to the Levant from southern Europe and mixed with local populations. Netanyahu tweeted in response, "There's no connection between the ancient Philistines and the modern Palestinians, whose ancestors came from the Arabian Peninsula to the land of Israel thousands of years later. The Palestinians' connection to the land of Israel is nothing compared to the 4,000-year connection that the Jewish people have had with the land." Netanyahu's response to the study sparked controversy, but the study did not address the genetic history of Jews or Palestinians or their connection to the land. Here are some historical assertions you might find on social media today, which are deployed for political purposes. Zionists really hate the truth. According to Johns Hopkins genetics study, shows 97.5% of Judaics living in Palestine have absolutely no ancient Hebrew DNA and therefore not Semites, and have no ancient bloodlines to the land of Palestine at all, whereas 80% of Palestinians do. 80% of the world's Jews are Khazars, Jewish converts who are not Semitic, not Israelites, not Judean, and have zero ancestral ties to the land of Palestine. No wonder DNA tests are forbidden in Israel without a court order. The results would show that Palestinians are the original Jews. They're referring to an article written in 2013 by a lone geneticist, Aryan who tried to resurrect the old Khazarian hypothesis. His study is about Ashkenazi, European Jews only, but subsequent studies done by a whole host of geneticists have shown his results to be inaccurate, that in fact, European Jews, by and large, share ancestry with Middle Eastern Jews. The politicization of ancient DNA analysis is part of a broader trend of using archaeological data for political purposes. Israeli archaeologists are always looking for more material evidence establishing themselves in the land. Some people have accused them of fabricating evidence, and some have even accused them of deliberately destroying evidence that contradicts their claims. People are fighting over ancient history, and I think this is bad, because it interferes with the sober and neutral collection and evaluation of evidence. I'm not saying that claiming territory based on historical precedent is completely invalid. It's a complex issue. Typically, a country justifies its territorial claims through a mix of historical occupation, treaties, international recognition, and self-determination. There's no fixed period for basing territorial claims on historical events, so each case is assessed individually. International law and diplomatic negotiations are crucial in resolving these disputes. Essentially, countries claim territory by demonstrating sufficient control to gain recognition from others, using history as a justification. But the further back in history you go, the less relevant it is, because so much has happened in the meantime, not to mention the fact that the link between present-day people and ancient people is much weaker. So, does ancestral residence really justify territorial claims? If we were to return lands to their historical inhabitants, it would lead to endless cycles of displacing current residents. The historical occupancy of territories is so intricate and overlapping that it becomes infeasible to track and justify such claims. So I don't believe that historical claims alone justify ownership of land, especially if current residents have lived there their entire lives. It may seem paradoxical that individuals care deeply about an ancient past that doesn't really directly impact their personal interests, but they often do. Nationalism explains this phenomenon as people identify with their nation and its interests. When other sources of self-esteem like job status or social rank are not significant, national identity may become more important. Consequently, threats to national identity, such as losing a historically owned territory, can trigger strong emotional reactions because they undermine a source of individual pride. Losing a historically owned territory is perceived as unjust and humiliating, and the more nationalistic one's viewpoint, the greater is the tendency to favor uncompromising outcomes in such disputes. Territories are often physically divisible, but territorial indivisibility exists in people's beliefs. A recent study was done on this subject, and it revealed that a group of people that views losing a disputed territory as unjust are inclined to feel the need to fully recover it to restore justice, seeing any compromise as incomplete justice. And thus, the historical loss of territory fosters a sense of indivisibility of the land, and there's an idea more powerful than worry over the opponent's military strength, the economic value of the territory, or whether it's an island or part of a landmass. The study also showed that those who see a territory as indivisible are more inclined to support economic sanctions and military solutions rather than bilateral negotiations or international arbitration. In political science, a culture war refers to a conflict between various social groups who compete to spread their own ideology into their society through political means. This can be done through positive actions like legislation, protests, garnering public support through internet manipulation, or through negative actions like canceling or banning. Both the left and the right do it. What does this have to do with ancient history? When I started this ancient history channel, I thought if I just stuck to the history, I would be unlikely to find myself in any crossfire between present-day political sides. But I underestimated the culture war. I've been noticing a trend lately, which is for people to portray the debate between the scholarly view of history and the alternative archaeological view of history as a political disagreement between left and right. In other words, academia represents the left, and alt-archaeology, ancient aliens, Atlantis, etc., represents the right. If history is based on evidence, then really all that should matter is the evidence. But if someone can make this seem like a political debate, then it's just a matter of taking sides. If you believe in conservative principles, individual freedom, limited government, and free markets, somehow that means rejecting what academics have to say about ancient history automatically. No, I don't understand that reasoning at all, but it's there. The fact is, this is not about left and right at all. It's about letting the evidence speak for itself, and it doesn't matter what your politics are. Part of this has to do with the general conception that academia is woke, and woke people are on the left, and woke is bad. In the minds of some, universities and even public schools are leftist cesspools, and you should homeschool. So anything that comes out of these places is left-wing propaganda. So why not teach yourself ancient history instead? I should add that it's not only the right that sometimes portrays academic ancient history as woke, but academics sometimes portray alternative history as racist, colonialist, misogynist, etc., buzzwords often used to describe the right. So these people too contribute in their own way to this artificial division. I don't like this polarization of ancient history. I don't like how it is presented as a war between two political groups, because it isn't. It's a war between historical claims, and there are better claims and there are worse claims. History is not a team sport. We ought to judge each proposal by its merits. Some people believe that historical inquiry should be always aligned with modern political narratives or activist goals. But this compromises the integrity of historical investigation and makes it a political tool rather than what it should be, a search for truth as best as it can be known. If someone rejects the factuality of a historical claim merely on the grounds that it sounds woke to them, or on the grounds that it sounds bigoted to them, this is putting politics first. This appears to me to be an implicit rejection of the historical method. There may very well be historical claims that are woke, and there may very well be historical claims that are bigoted. Bigotry certainly is harmful to society, so it's something to be concerned about. And wokeness, well, I suppose if it's extreme, it could be harmful to society. But these are issues unrelated to whether an event in the past actually happened. These are issues related to responses to historical events. That's not the same thing. There are some people who call a historical idea woke just to get people not to accept it. This is not only a dishonest tactic, they're making it political when it might not be. Similarly, there are people who call an idea racist just to get people not to accept it, even when it might not be. If a historical claim has its origins in racist thought, but in its present version it has been scrubbed of the racist elements, is it still racist? Some people say yes. But if it's not the historical idea itself that is racist, but rather that it was an idea invented by racists a long time ago when everyone was racist, that's only a guilt by association argument. The strategy of trying to get someone to drop an idea by associating it with racism is a terrible one anyway. It's more often taken as an ad hominem than as a real argument, and will have the opposite effect than what is hoped for, and it makes you look like you're out of arguments. What really matters is whether an event happened or not. And that goes for the anti-woke people too. What matters is not whether it is woke. What matters is whether it's true. Oh, so then you think that questioning the historicity of the Holocaust is okay as long as the historical method is employed? Haven't you been listening? Holocaust denial is ideologically motivated. The matter has been researched to the nth degree, more than most historical events, and the facts are clear. The only reason to reopen such a case is politics. But I would not go to the other extreme either. I've had people remind me that history and science should leave value judgments at the door. It should only be about the facts, and offering an opinion about the morality, the rightness or wrongness of any historical event or historical person or entity or the opinions of people from the past should be kept out of it. And indeed, in my classes at the local college, I teach my students not to put value judgments into their papers. Stick to the facts. Be objective. So yeah, I agree that in scholarship, when we are examining a historical situation and we're trying to ascertain what happened, it is the evidence that matters. I do not agree with putting value judgments in such papers. However, to then say that a historian should not be permitted, after the fact, to make a value judgment about anything that happened in history is unreasonable. To say that at a dinner party, or speaking with friends, or on social media, or in an op-ed, or on YouTube, they aren't ever allowed to express any opinion about the morality of any historical situation or about any other historian's views ever. They're banned from value judgments for life. Well, this is ridiculous. Yes, you can rightly ask for a historian of the Soviet Union to be as objective and neutral as possible when reconstructing the history of what happened. But to say they aren't allowed in any other venue to ever say Stalin was bad, that wouldn't be reasonable, would it? I once made a video on the worst tyrants in history, and someone actually got angry with me because I was judging people of the past, and historians should not do that. This is YouTube, people. I wasn't writing an academic paper. On another occasion, I remember in a video I made about Brian Forster, people got the idea that I was pulling the race card to get people not to believe him. This was the one about Maya architecture. And I made this statement. Setting aside the optics of a white man taking tours through the Maya homeland and calling their accomplishments into question, let's look at Maya building technology a little closer and see how much Brian Forster even knows. Now, the first part of this statement was just an aside, not an argument, and it was in my intro. Yes, I was making a value judgment, and oh man, did some people get mad. What the heck are optics of a white man doing in such a video? Science and history/archaeology need clear minds, objective minds. Those of us who want science to be respected and safe from Hancock et al. do not need moronic anti-science woke ideology in the debate. Plus, your idiotic optics of a white man, so typical of soft sciences, has a major problem. There are Central American content creators who are not white and agree with this charlatan's ideas. Help keep science clean and distant from ideologies who actually hate science. Lost all respect when you threw in the race baiting. You can dispute his claims without assuming it's race-based. Using your own logic, a white person can never question the works of an indigenous people. You should be more professional than that. When did I assume Forster's position was race-based? I was talking about a guy taking tours through another people's country and saying, "The people here think they made this, but they didn't." It's not a good look, especially considering what Europeans have already denied them. I'm forbidden from saying it's not a good look. I agree with everything you said in this video concerning historical facts. However, I take serious offense to what you said at 136, setting aside the optics of a white man. What does Brian being white have anything to do with this argument? I'm so tired of the race baiting from both sides of the political or educational spectrum. Why can't we just stick to historical or scientific facts about the subject at hand without injecting race into the conversation? Even though you said setting aside, you still injected race into the conversation. This ruined everything about the video, for me at least. I really wanted to concentrate on the history you were presenting. Instead, all I could think about was why you would inject race into the conversation. Damn it, would you please stop? It's very telling when someone can't concentrate on anything else in the video after they hear an innocuous comment like this. There's something going on up here. There's some history. Let's imagine that you and I were walking down the street, and you had a bag of groceries, and we passed a playground with a bunch of kids with their moms, and you said, "Hey, I have some candy in the bag. I'm going to go offer some candy to that little girl over there, just to be nice." And I said, "Wait, I don't think you should do that. It's bad optics for a middle-aged man to go offer candy to kids on the playground. The moms might not take kindly to that." Would you tell me it's offensive to bring up your age and gender like that? I don't think you would. In a perfect world, no one would bat an eyelid. But you know that past historical context maybe should inform our behavior a bit. My comment about Mr. Forster should be taken in the same spirit. If someone tells you directly that you might be inadvertently offending people, don't take this as an accusation that you're racist. Take it as advice. A strong person can take criticism. Don't be like the snowflakes. If someone told you, "Hey, don't take that artifact from this archaeological site. It's stealing," would you ever say, "Stop trying to impose your woke ideology on me"? No, because you know that stealing artifacts is wrong, and you wouldn't turn an ethical matter into a political matter. You wouldn't make this part of a culture war. It's the same thing here. Now, I know some of you might say, it's not racist if it's true. If the Maya didn't really make these buildings, then it's not racist to say so. Sure. But you had better be dang certain you're right. And you know what? You're not. The evidence that people present to suggest that indigenous peoples didn't make the great monuments in their land is so weak that no one who knows anything about the subject believes it. So, what are you going to do? Go around spreading a fringe view on the odd chance it could be true? That's what Forster does. He doesn't say he knows for sure the Maya didn't make the structures. He says it's just his opinion. I think it's irresponsible, and I'll tell Mr. Forster that to his face. It's popular these days to police the way people use words. People on the left do it a lot. They say you should use this word instead of that word, and yes, I know it can seem extreme sometimes, and it might be annoying. It's hard to keep track of what you are allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. And I think it's wrong to impugn bad motives to people for inadvertently using the wrong word or an outdated word for something. But this can happen when someone is talking about ancient history, too. It's part of the culture war. But it isn't only the left that gets offended at words. Some of the anti-woke people also are triggered by certain words. If you're an academic writing about history, Oh, don't ever use the words social construct, intersectional, pluralism, diversity, decolonization, heteronormative, cisnormative, climate change, marginalization. Oh, words like that. People have called me woke for saying BCE instead of BC, even though this terminology has been used in scholarship for ages, long before the culture wars. Heck, people have called me woke simply for criticizing Graham Hancock's ideas, or for even believing what academics say. People have called anthropologists woke for discarding racial classifications and preferring instead to use genetic or linguistic categories, which are objectively better. Why be angry about people on the left policing words if you do the same? Whatever the case, if you get upset because someone wrote about climate change in ancient times, you just took a non-political scientific subject and turned it political. You know what else gets called woke that isn't? Researching neglected areas of ancient history. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, the most commonly researched subject areas were governments, politics, wars, things like that. Then people started going deeper into more neglected areas of study. The lives of the common people, social culture, women, sexuality, what brown-skinned people were doing in light-skinned societies. And today, you'll see research being done in queer history, etc. Honest question, if you go into a bookstore and you pick up a book in the history section titled something like The History of Queer People in the Ancient Times, is your immediate reaction to say, woke? Why? Do you believe that certain segments of ancient society are not to be researched or written about? Do you think that a book like that will turn you gay or something? Will a book about women turn you into a woman? Whatever the case, you just made it political. The writer of the book didn't. You did. You didn't even read the book. Now, I realize that some people like to be offended just for the sake of being offended. They are reactionaries by nature, but sometimes it's easy to get caught up in all that. Anyway, those are my thoughts. If you're itching to write a comment about how something I said offended you, maybe think about it a little bit more. Are you upset because of a political belief that you hold? Do you want to argue politics? Don't bother. I know that people in the comments will be asking me to give my actual political opinions about X, Y, or Z. I avoided that in my video on purpose because I want this channel to be for everyone. So in line with this principle, I will not be getting into any of that. The only political opinions of mine that you need to know about are 1. I don't like it when governments dictate what historians are or are not allowed to say, or in any way take away their academic freedom. And 2, I don't like it when people base ancient history on their ideology rather than on evidence. That's all you need to know about my politics for now. I have very strong opinions about many issues, and they're not always right down the middle, but this is not the place for expressing them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you like what this channel is doing and want to help keep it running, consider becoming a patron for as little as $2 per month at patreon.com/World of Antiquity. Or you can simply give a super thanks as a one-time donation. You might like my little e-booklet, Why Ancient History Matters. It's designed to persuade people that the subject is important, even in the modern world. You might also wish to use it to help spread the word, so feel free to share it with someone you know. It's free for anyone who wants it. I've left a link in the description box below the video for you to grab a copy. Catch you later.